These are sort of 9-year-old glasses. As part of the renovation, I broke my prescription glasses, and they are now at the optician to be repaired. I should have them in everywhere. Yeah, they're actually quite good.
Toimi joo, meitä oli muutama puolikuntoinen tapaus siinä.
Hei moi moi. Hei. Mä oon päässyt takaisin, joo. No oli ihan joo. Mä en ole siellä monta vuotta käynyt aikaisemmin. Okei, joo. Helvettinmoinen matkustaminen, mutta se oli kauhean kiinnostavaa katsoa, kun siellä oli pelkkiä asianharrastajia ja Heideggeriä. Se oli hyvin tämmöinen.
Esitellä Kirsi myös.
So, good morning, everybody. Did you enjoy your last night? Did you have a good night yesterday? Yeah, some of us did. I hope you all did. It's a beautiful morning, and it's great to see so many of you back here today. The arts can enhance people in its particular institutions, but also in a number of other contexts. Often the threshold for participation is lower in places that don't carry the sort of a elitist stigma that many arts institutions do. In some places, people simply do not have access to arts and culture if opportunities to participate don't exist where they are. Yet, participation in the arts is a cultural right that has a constitutional premise. The Constitution states that everyone has the right to participate in the arts and educate oneself and one's community through participation in the arts. In today's presentation, we'll hear about art and participation in different environments, in education, in a prison, in the substance abuse treatment. Alan Owens is co-director of the Center for Research in Education, Creativity and Arts through Practice. He is professor of Journal Teaching Fellow. His current work focuses on creative pedagogy, the intercultural dimension of drama, and in particular the use of drama in professions, including arts-based initiatives in organizations and businesses. Alan is particularly interested in the use of process drama to create spaces for dialogue, both within and between disciplines and cultures. This has led him to work in a wide range of professional contexts in the UK and overseas, including education, theatre, health, community, business organizations, and justice settings. Today, his topic will be transprofessional context and creativity and democracy in education. Please welcome Alan Owens.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much, Kai. I would like to just read from the programme again on day 2 of the seminar. Many artists and art pedagogues have worked for a long time with community art, but there are still limited forums of discussion in the field. Both the authors and the students have the need to share experiences, good practices and problems, to gain more information and to get together to reflect on the issues of the field. And again, this is what today is about, a chance to get together and reflect on the issues of the field. And in the opening openings here, the sentiment was expressed that we're all doing lots of things in different places. We don't often get time to come together. So it's the coming togetherness again of this morning and the chance to exchange things in response to what we hear today. So thanks very much for letting me join in this discussion. I really appreciate being here. And thanks to the students who created this wonderful space. As soon as I walked in, I thought it offers a different possibility than the usual formal setting. And thanks very much to the signers for signing today, and especially for not having all my written notes earlier than you have had them. Kai asked me back in January if I could come and talk about trans-professional context, creativity and democracy in education. And I'm not going to present a research paper here today, but rather share something with you, some very simple thoughts and feelings that keep returning to me as I engage with this work. And they centre around those concepts. What is trans-professionalism? How do we see creativity? A much used word in the UK, where I'm based. How do we see democracy and education in practice? So I'm not going to present a well-reasoned logical argument, rather it's a sharing of something. And I like this phrase, sharing something. I take it from Robert Wilson, who said, when asked, what's your work about, what's your art practice about? He said, well, the bottom line really is, it's about sharing something. So thank you for letting me share something today. This shadow image that you see now in front of you was created this summer in Tokyo. And I'm going to use the work there just as an example of one strand or ecology of practice, and looking at how the work that we do in trans-professional context leads us into all different sorts of areas. It was created by a group of manga voice acting students. And I was there working at the Nippon Engineering Institute, Kamata, the Tokyo University of Technology, where I've been working since 2000 on a series of projects that have evolved that I could not have imagined would have started when we first made contact all those years ago. And I choose this as an example of the way that hybridity seems to come out of the practice and the amazing possibilities that are opening up in the work today. I've also chosen it because it's a long-term project, and for me, the relational dimension of the work is really important. It really is about the relations between people and the projects that we make over a long term that really mean something to me and that I value greatly in the work. To be able to sit amongst communities and make different relations and work on projects and support each other as we're trying to make sense of the very complex and sometimes very confusing world that we're in. In Japan, the work is called Applied-O, so Applied Theatre and Education. And I first went there in 2000 on the invitation to say, can you come and see how Applied-O works in mainstream education settings, in schools and university settings? How might this be of use? And in a way, I think they were asking, how might we bring some of the learning from informal education into the mainstream? And the first phase of work lasted about just under 10 years. And we published a book in 2010 called Applied Drama and Theatre that was published by Toshabunka Press. And it marked the first phase of going somewhere in my role as a drama pedagogue, working in that setting. And then it started to change. So I'll refer back to that as we go through the presentation. So important questions are being asked in this seminar. And again, they appear simple when you first read them, but they're deceptively simple. They're really rather complex. Reading from the programme again. What do the arts-based practices and community art mean today? What can they mean today? What is the knowledge of artists and art pedagogues? And what are the unique aspects that are shareable as methods and possibilities? I certainly don't have the answers to those questions, but I have some thoughts about them. They're difficult questions to answer because they're concerned, I think, with the expansion and diversification of the social applications of art, particularly if this is taken to a point where they're accepted, expected, and understood to be part of everybody's everyday life in a democratic society. As Kai said in the introduction, as a right of a citizen to participate in this. So if you say, why drama in prisons? Well, it's a right. It's a way of making sense. Like, why should be people allowed books in prisons? It's a right. We can take away freedom, but there are certain rights that should travel with us, I think. I think it's a reasonable aspiration to say that that right should apply to everybody. But I wonder, what would it be like if we really did reach the stage where not only was it a right, but it really was part of the everyday fabric of our life? What would it be like for you? For artists and art pedagogues? Could it be like this? Could it be that it was a public resource like parks and libraries? Could it be that when you're working in organisations, you could say, who's your accountant? You could actually say, who's your artist? Imagine it. That there'd automatically be an artist there, and you'd expect it in just the same way as there would be an accountant there. It would be crazy not to have them there. Could it be a working tool like computers, a research methodology that's accepted like positivism? Could it be a speaker of truth to power like some journalists? Could it be a safe place like a kitchen table? A form of currency like money, but better because it's to do with cultural and social capital? Could it be a way of being like a way of being? I was thinking about this as I sat under a clock in Liverpool just over a week ago, thinking about putting the presentation together. And I thought, well, I just suddenly realised it's been 40 years this September that I've been doing this stuff. And it took me back thinking, well, how things have really changed. I don't want to bore you with my story of things, but we all step into a stream of work whenever we begin doing something. And I stepped into that stream in the 1970s. A lot of you now, as I see the next generation of artists and art pedagogues stepping into this field, you're stepping into the stream at a particular point. And as an academic, I'm always very interested into seeing how I fit into what's gone on in order to change what's gone on. When I stepped into it, things were very different. Just bear with me a little bit. In the 1970s, I started teaching in a place where there were lots of these people around. Coal miners. 1970, on the way to engage in my first drama practices in the industrial city of Sheffield in the UK and coal mining villages, I used to step over heaps of coal on the way to the schools and the community centres where I'd be doing the work. And at that time, in the late 1970s, there were 247,000 coal miners. My grandfather was a coal miner. So 250,000. I wonder today how many applied drama and theatre and arts pedagogues there are, and how many artists working for social change. I wonder, we can look up figures in terms of creative industries, but how many of us are actually engaged in this work? Because I've seen in the years since the 1970s, the vibrant, socially committed drama and theatre grow from applied drama and theatre to become ever more used in a wide range of fields as varied as education, development, health, therapy, social action, science, engineering, and a whole other range of organisational settings, public, private, and third sector. And at the same time, during that period, there's been a continuous question amongst academics, not only of the most effective research methods, but increasingly also of the philosophy underlying research efforts and our applied practice. There are more and more, for example, researchers, particularly in these last 5 years, who in their attempts to democratize the research process are using arts-based inquiry methods because of the potential to allow for a more inclusive, creative, and in-depth approach to research, allowing the participants, those we work with, control over the process, more control over the process and the issues discussed, and often benefiting by imparting and sharing skills between each other. So I think it's fair to say, as I look around and see those changes, that as in the programme, as is stated, artists and art pedagogues' professional images, have they expanded and continue to expand. And as the concept and role of art gains new dimensions in diverse organisational environments and work communities in the public, private and third sector, as well as in the community. Maybe we really are in the age of the new. Maybe it has arrived. Maybe we are in the place where all of the things I used to think could happen are happening now. And certainly the presentations, as I heard about them yesterday, suggest that they are in many ways here in Finland. I didn't attend the sessions because they were in Finnish. Thank you for listening to me in English today. But when I asked Anni Pasila, who is my colleague I work a lot with, who's a visiting research fellow in our research unit, I said, "How was it yesterday? How were the presentations? What did you see?" And she talked about, well, it's really hopeful. It was really sort of positive, and a sense that, yeah, there's a new generation of practitioners and thinkers and researchers. Maybe this is the new. And the new, the title's taken from a book by Michael Lewis in '99, Silicon Valley, talking about the entrepreneurial culture that developed in the new. Let's just think that we're doing. And I wonder, rather than the miners that used to be around that now have all gone, I wonder what would the arts pedagogue and arts practitioner work look like? What would they be doing? What are we doing in this boundary area, as Kai called it, of working in hybrid context, opening up new ways of practicing, new job opportunities for artists and arts pedagogues? It's a new market, and I use that word really carefully, with all the attendant possibilities and dangers associated with the forms of capitalist markets that are taken in each of our countries. I wonder, would we have thought this, say, 5 years ago? I was talking with Krista Petijärvi yesterday, and she said, 5 years ago, I wouldn't imagine I would have been doing this job in Finland in terms of promoting and increasing understanding of the work that arts and arts pedagogues can do, for example, with organisations. I spoke with Nina Nurminen at the break, and she said, "Oh, do you remember 10 years ago when we were here doing some work? Who would have thought I would have been doing the work I'm doing now in all the different contexts I'm doing them?" And speaking with Annie, 15 years ago, would I really have thought that I would be working in such a variety of places with such a wide range of professions? And then this colleague I just want to introduce you to is Yosuke Ohashi. 20 years ago, I started working with him. He's the same age as me, 61. He works on the other side of the world. I'm an arts pedagogue, he's an artist. My form of work is pretext-based process drama. It's a form of participatory, story-based, community, oral storytelling. His form of work is shintashi body poetry. It's a form of work based on some of the ancient Japanese traditions, and it uses communication without words, through movement. Shintashi body poetry. And the two of us were together 2 weeks ago, and we were thinking 20 years ago, talking about, again, would we have imagined the context that we were working in, both here and in Japan? And we know it's not confined. We've got colleagues from New Zealand here, from Canada, and from the UK. We know it's not confined to those countries. And in Japan, there's some very interesting developments, again, going on in exactly the same way. How would Yosuke imagine? He was a performer in a company. Now he's working in health settings, he's working with consultancies, but he's also doing his own artistic practice. He doesn't see any contradiction between the two things. And again, I might just refer back to that relationship that has developed between us and the things we've learned in our art forms and in sharing how they can translate into different contexts. But just for a minute, let's just stick with this possibility of the new, the now that we're all working in. My reality is somehow I do end up working with all different people from different professions. And when Kai asked me to speak about trans-professionalism, I thought, let's just offer it as a phrase, not to call ourselves trans-professionals. You know, we're artists and art pedagogues, but we often find ourselves working in trans-professional contexts. And I'll talk a little bit more about what my understanding of that is. But if we just think back, I'm just going to invite you to think back over the last 2 weeks of what you have been doing. What sort of things have you been doing and who have you been engaging with? And how varied are they? Was it ever possible just to totally work on our own form of work? Kai referred to yesterday to the modernist discourse of arts, that arts and its sacred autonomous territory. Or have we always been interacting with others? So who have you been interacting with from different professions, different areas, different disciplines? I'm presuming that you've been working. In the UK, we're just 2 weeks back to work. We have a holiday in August. I know here you have a holiday in July, so you've been at it a little bit longer. But we're just back. Let me just tell you what I've been doing. Just a flavour in these last 2 weeks that I could not have imagined 20 or even 10 years ago. And I think it would be mirrored by Yoski's work on the other side of the world, and I'm guessing quite a few colleagues here. So I came back from a summer holiday. The first thing was on Friday, the 31st of August, I went to the Art of Management in Organisations conference in Brighton. And we ran a track calling for academic papers from practitioners and academics, looking at workplace and theatre and how they can innovate together for organisational sustainability. I was working with a health professional, an artist, and an educator. On the Saturday, we presented a different paper in a different track, and it was about the use of reflective visual sketchbooks in management. And that was with a professor of information technology. And we've been working together on that as a way of reflecting and considering the work that we do when we're working with other professions. On the Sunday and Monday, we launched a planning meeting of a new 3-year strategic alliance project called Artist-Led Learning in Higher Education. And that included within the team a military academy in Norway with the Air Force and a business school in France. I welcomed in the next 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, doctoral students I'm supervising who range from work in the early years, and work with young children is an area where you often have trans-professional context because many people are looking out for the welfare of our youngest in society. To working with an artist academic colleague who's just handed a first draft in of a thesis called Felt Experiences, of working with felt in women's groups. I work with a doctoral student from Palestine who's focused on the challenges of an academic leaving Gaza to study, of having to leave his homeland to get the education that should be his right, and conducting it through narrative inquiry in the form of stories. So as an alternative arts-based submission for a doctoral thesis. And then on Thursday, I found myself in Manchester at the North West Health Authority, working with a group of service users in mental health, professors of medicine, and other members of the community that were there to look at, can we begin to redefine what mental health means in this country? Because the systems are certainly not working at the moment. How far upstream can we go? And we needed a trans-professional team to start doing that. And that group I'm working with are responsible for all the research and design in medical research in the northwest of England, an area that's got about 7 million people in it. We couldn't tackle that from one particular discipline or perspective. We had to bring together a team to look at that. That was the first week anyway. But I hope it's given you some time just to think. And it's not saying, haven't I had a busy week? It's just trying to show the diversity of things. Can I just stop for a minute and just ask you, whoever's nearby you, just to perhaps, what have you been doing, or the last few weeks or a few weeks before that, if you have been on holiday? How trans-professional is your work? How often do you spend your time working with people from very different professions? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to engage with each other a minute. Do introduce yourselves as well. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you. Could we have just maybe a couple of people who might share what they're thinking or talking about? Anybody?
Well,
yes? Could I pass that?
Hi. I've been mostly working with colleagues. Then I've been visiting here as lecturer, but then I've been also spending time on the field with the local people from suburb of Helsinki, having an art club in the community garden that we have, dance lessons for people with the autism spectrum.
Okay. Oh, so very varied. And I think just to say one out, say, for example, the community garden and urban regeneration is a big area for trans-professional working. How can you consider that without bringing all sorts of professionals and citizens who live there? How can you do that without that mix of professionals? Well, thanks very much for sharing that. Anyone else perhaps just sharing one? Insight into your week and how you spend it.
Who wants to have the mic?
Nick.
I've been lecturing software engineering students using arts-based methods or studio pedagogies to enhance their creative collaboration.
Aha. So, yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, I actually had the privilege of going back into the studio for 3 weeks of half days of exploration with 8 dancers. And at the same time, I was planning advocacy work in Ottawa with federal officials and politicians. I also gave a workshop for business school social innovation folks, and finishing up a communications plan for our center. So,
really varied. Thanks, Judith. Thank you.
In last 1 or 2 weeks, I have been a dancer in one inclusive dance project, and we have been working and performing in Turku. And then I have been teaching a dance with adults, and also yesterday evening with children and their parents. And they have been like children with special needs. And then I have been also giving workshops and lectures in ammattikorkeakoulu.
Applied University, yeah.
Applied studies with a social field people. So all my projects has been in dance field.
Yes.
But I'm going from one place to other with taxi. So in taxi I'm thinking that what is my role in next project and next place that I need to all the time change my.
Isn't that interesting? What's my role as you're in the taxi? Yeah. Probably sleeping a bit as well if you've been that busy. Thanks ever so much. Thanks a lot. I think my interest in what you're doing is to suggest, well, it's here, isn't it? We are doing this work. I keep repeating this, but we're actually living it. We're doing it in different ways. But I really appreciate that point where you said, thinking about what your role is. And your role was, it was intergenerational as well, wasn't it? You're working with families, you're working with the parents and with the young people in many different contexts as well. I wonder if this is new is here then, what should the questions be that we're asking ourselves? Here are mine, they're not yours, but I offer them as a provocation to you. What are your questions? I'm wondering, well, what is it exactly we do? Because we need to explain that to people, perhaps, and to advocate for that. If we can't say what we're doing, it's difficult to advocate and push the field and the work forward. How do we do? And there's no monopoly on that. We all have our own forms of work. How do we do it, though? So what do we do and how do we do it? And how do we talk about what we're doing? And who do we talk with about what we're doing? And how do we talk about how we're talking? That's a really important one, I think, in terms of the people that we're with in spaces and allowing the governance of that group from the very beginning to always raise the question of how are we talking about how are we talking? If it's not established from the opening, it's very difficult to go back and return to that. And then really importantly for me, I'm asking now at this point, why do we do what we do? Without getting lost in that, I think it's critical. What's the anchor? Why do we get up in the morning and do this work? Why do you get in that taxi and go to all those places to do that work? No, why do you plan such a variety of work and step into areas that maybe aren't as comfortable as our home might be in an art form or a pedagogical art setting? I'm not going to answer those questions again, but perhaps I'll just say a little something about the concepts that are important for me that relate to these. And it's got something to do with translation. Here's another slide from the project that we were doing. And for me, even when we all speak the same language, even when it's monoglot, we're still engaged in an act of translation. We're trying to understand each other. So defining those terms without getting lost in semantics, I think, is really important. These are very important words for me: transprofessionalism, practice, creativity, education, democracy, and ethics. You will have your own different set of words. I wonder what they are as you listen to me talking about these a little. What are the words and the concepts that are central to what you're doing? What would they be on this screen? I'm just going to stop for 1 minute and go back to the work in Japan. How things take a surprising turn. And not getting very far in terms of working with an education system to introduce applied drama and theatre methods, because it's an incredibly big ship to make any change in steering, and doing research into the challenges of actually beginning to introduce new forms of pedagogy in different systems and not being able to import one cultural form into another culture. Suddenly, things changed. There was a huge earthquake, you might remember, in 2011. And Japanese society shuddered, as societies have shuddered in different places in the world at different points in time. We're living in a very challenging, complex, and bewildering world at times, I think. So, for example, when the Twin Towers went down, that was another shuddering moment. And as a practitioner, focusing on work in mainstream education, all the colleagues in our national association in the UK who were working out in schools and universities said, nobody's talking about this. People have come in the morning and we're just carrying on as though things are normal. What should we do? We had an emergency meeting in Birmingham. Everybody came. Should we talk about it? How do we talk about it? How can we use our art forms to talk about this thing that suddenly surprised us? How do we interrupt business as usual? And so there's a collision between everyday practices and the need, perhaps as artists and pedagogues, to think we should do something. And the same happened here in Japan. It happened in March, and I was due to go in April. So it was like 3 weeks afterwards, March the 11th. And with colleagues, Japanese colleague in the UK, who I always work with, and Yosuke in Japan, we said, what can we do? What should we look at? How can we, do we talk about it? How can I, as an English person, come across and presume to talk about it? Well, they said, well, how can you come and not talk about it? And then it's the question of, but how close do you come to talk about it? And the whole issue of aesthetic distance in our artwork. How close do we come to something to allow something that might be useful rather than adding to the pain and the grief that was going on? And we turned to myth, or they suggested it, and we turned to the Japanese creation story, the story of Izanami and Izanagi from the Kajiki, the record of ancient matters. And suddenly I found myself reverting to my arts practice to go and construct a pretext and what should we talk? How do we talk about this thing that's happened? And so we arranged a tour to different higher education institutions, community spaces, schools in Tokyo, and we toured this round. So the work shifted. And that's led to a nearly 7 years' work now, working and coming closer and closer to the center, the epicenter of that disaster. One of the theatre company that Yosuke belongs to, another member, Taboo, when it happened, we had workshops, but he also went straight there. He just drove, like many people did, to see if they could do anything. And he ended up with a shovel, actually shoveling mud out of wrecked and washed houses. So physically working. And for the first year he was doing that. But then slowly the theatre forms started to find its way into the communities that were there. And I'll say a little bit more about that later, how that began to diversify. And on one level you think, are these artists and art pedagogues creating work out of misery? Or is it right that we should, of course, be there and be part of whatever is going on in the country that we live in? And as a practitioner working there on a long-term relational project, I see myself as working with colleagues, so it's assisting and being with them in what they're trying to do in their context, just as they assist me when they come to mine. But I'll come back to that shortly. Let's go back to transprofessionalism for a minute. What is it? If you look at definitions of it, of course it's working with other people, but let's look at some of the language to do with it. Achieving a more integrated approach in which the human being, the individual citizen, is the centre of concern, not the maintenance of professional silos of work for the benefit of those employed within them. It's about embracing an ecology of uncertainty, weaving a fabric of the underlying about transprofessionalism is that it requires exchanging knowledge in the realms. I know discourse in order to participate in some of the contexts that were drawing me towards them. It's an assumption, though. It doesn't mean it's correct. And it might actually not be speaking to any of you. There might be people here in the room going, I don't even like the word professional. It's elitist in itself. Citizens are their own experts. And the transprofessional literature, some of it would say, yes, we acknowledge that, but there are also those who've been working a long time as and with citizens. And it would be strange to ignore their experience. It would be strange to ignore the experience of a firefighter, or a fireman, as we call them in the UK. They've got expertise in what they do. It'd be strange to ignore the experience of an artist in terms of the experience of what they do, and of an arts pedagogue. So that's the underlying assumption. We talk a lot about practice. What do we mean about practice? Yesterday, the word, it's almost self-evident in what we talk about. But we each, I would suggest, construe it in different ways. And how we construe it, I think, gives us an important take on how we see our work occurring in time and place and space. The debate that came up yesterday about change and transformation. What do we mean by that? So practice, what is it? Writing with my colleague, Jeff Adams, at our centre, we wrote the book, Creativity, Democracy and Education, the practices and politics of learning through the arts. We thought we've got to try and just articulate for other people we're working with what we understand by that, for ourselves, in order to communicate it. We talked about, of course, practice is an important concept. They arise from us. The practice arises from social interactions and collaborations. They are our main concern. And we use practice to mean the ways in which ideas are manifest in the world. And arts practices, in the discussion of that word creativity, are really important for that discussion. And practice in this sense means more than the physical putting into effect of an idea. It goes beyond this to constitute the idea itself. Thinking through practice to the point where thinking is the practice and vice versa. Is it perhaps, to me, getting to that point where we're talking about embodied learning and we're talking about the non-rational? And if I give you one example to ground this, Yoski, who still works with his company creating his artistic pieces, is working a lot in health. And he developed a very simple technique called symbolic walk, in which he asked, in one context I saw him working with, a group of nurses, experienced nurses, to reflect on their first 3 years of training. And he said, could you just walk from here to probably where you are now? Could you walk this space? And could you walk out the first 3 years of your training and say what it was like? And he modeled it, and he showed that the first year might have been like this, and the second, and something might have happened, and you might have done this. So no words, and they walked in. They had a partner, and one person watched them doing that walk. When they'd finished, they sat down, and their partner did the walk that they'd done, so they had time to look at their 3 years training. So the thinking is the practice there. I know this is not new, but to give an example, the thinking is the practice. You weren't asked to discuss the 3 years. While it was quite intensive or rather theoretical, it was embodied, and it was read, and it was replayed. And it created a space for reflection and thinking. And I think in terms of, if we're looking at trans-professional practice and what we can bring as artists and arts pedagogues, we can talk about all the skills and the soft skills we've got and the fine abilities to read the room. But maybe key to it, and this is coming through working with Annie Passler and our work together and with Kai, is creating a space. And this isn't new. Artists and art pedagogues create spaces. But what do we create them for? Maybe what we can create them for in trans-professional contexts and in organizational settings and in community settings is a space for reflection. And as a way, again to refer to Annie and Professor Russ Vance's work, to organize reflection in that space. Because when we're working, or I've found when working in trans-professional contexts, it's often very messy. You walk into situations when people are from different organizations, they bring their own power structures with them. Some people are more powerful than others in the room. I'm not in any way suggesting we go in with a symbolic walk to a fraught trans-professional context and say, hey, let's all just walk how difficult this meeting is. It would be a catastrophe. But through certain ways, we begin, I think, to use our skills to lead to the situation where we can use our work in order to create that space. And that's the really interesting stuff for me at the moment to research into. And how do we talk about that? Can we only talk about it through the thick cultural narratives of particular places at particular times? Maybe. But maybe there's a huge database of those that we can draw on and look at. That's what we're looking in the Northwest Health Project. Can we, through our work, get a whole database of stories of people and the way that they've experienced mental health and the systems and how they're failing, so that people can hear them? A little way in the way that Judith was talking about the cancer patients and the play that was produced so that it could speak to others and people could hear it. What if we did that for the whole UK, is what we're thinking at the moment. Again, not a revolutionary idea, but creating a space in order to create a resource that might create a space for others. So practice and what that means. Again, not suggesting that this should be your definition, but how would you talk about that? Another slide from the creation. What about creativity, this word? And creativity is much maligned. It's sort of worn threadbare. Some people don't like it, but it's still very prevalent. In the UK, it's come to mean, for a lot of the time, do more with less, rather than do things interestingly and find out things you don't know. And do more with less, and the neoliberal paradigm that as artists, I guess. And we use the term in the work when we try to conceptualize it, of critical creativity, to indicate that agency, imagination, and political action are the fundamental constituents of this process. And engagement in it is the key. So how do we engage and how do we bring the human back to the center of things? Because in those trans-professional contexts, the person can often get lost in the expertise of the people in the room. And could it be the function of the artist and the arts pedagogue, of one of them, to create the space where that person doesn't get lost, where the individual human being is central to it? So the arts and democracy can be both collaborative or collective projects, especially if we dismiss the more conventional view that the arts are singular and individual. And in this common ground, the arts can be fundamental